Trump lost the popular vote by 7 million. Trump lost 60 court cases, 60. Trump lost the Republican-controlled states. Trump lost before a Trump-appointed judge, and then judges. And Trump lost before the United States Supreme Court. All of it, he lost. Trump exhausted every legal avenue available to him to overturn the election. Every one. But the legal path just took Trump back to the truth. That I'd won the election and he was a loser.
President Biden just gave his first official campaign speech of 2024, and it was excellent. Using the January 6th insurrection as framework, the president directly called out Donald Trump's fascistic agenda and campaign in a way and with words that are sure to trigger the MAGA cult in general and Trump himself, particularly when he referred to Trump by the most accurate insult of all and the word that Trump hates more than anything. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, the speech was about 30 minutes long. We're not going to play the whole thing. Otherwise, we'll be here for about 3 hours because there's plenty to talk about. As a matter of fact, the clips I've assembled for you that we're going to go through are basically in like the first quarter of the speech itself. So I urge you to check it out in its entirety because I guarantee you, based on Biden's energy and his rhetoric, this is going to get a lot of backlash from the Fox Propaganda Network and other MAGA corners. So with that in mind, I want to play the first clip in which President Biden's the very beginning of the speech. He talks about George Washington. He uses because the speech was given near Valley Forge, which was a major site of the Revolutionary War. And he talks about George Washington and America's commitment, even in its infancy, to reject monarchy.
In the winter of 1777, it was harsh and cold as the Continental Army marched to Valley Forge. General George Washington knew he faced the most daunting of tasks, to fight and win a war against the most powerful empire existent in the world at the time. His mission was clear: liberty, not conquest; freedom, not domination; national independence, not individual glory. America made a vow: never again would we bow down to a king.
Never again would we bow down to a king. And you can probably already see where this speech is headed, but it dovetails nicely with the rest of it. In this next clip, Joe Biden asks a question to the nation, and he says it's not rhetorical, and I don't think it is. This is the important question of the campaign about the role democracy is supposed to play in America's future.
America. Today, we gather in a new year, some 246 years later, just one day before January 6th. A date forever shared in our memory because it was on that day that we nearly lost America, lost it all. Today, we're here to answer the most important of questions. Is democracy still America's sacred cause? I mean it. This is not rhetorical, academic, or hypothetical. Whether democracy is still America's sacred cause is the most urgent question of our time. And it's what the 2024 election is all about. The choice is clear. Donald Trump's campaign is about him, not America, not you. Donald Trump's campaign is obsessed with the past, not the future. He's willing to sacrifice our democracy, put himself in power. Our campaign is different. For me and Kamala, our campaign is about America. It's about you. It's about every age and background that occupy this country. It's about the future we're going to continue to build together. And our campaign is about preserving and strengthening our American democracy.
So again, he draws the contrast there, that Donald Trump is a malignant narcissist. This campaign is entirely about him. He's obsessed with relitigating the 2020 election. As a matter of fact, either within the past 24, 36 hours, Donald Trump supposedly dropped this debunk of the 2020 election, which proves that he actually won it. It's all nonsense, of course. We haven't had a chance to talk about it, especially given all the other things going on. But this man cannot accept the fact that he lost. And that right there is key to future clips we're going to play of this speech. In this third one, Biden puts he contextualizes, he recaps January 6th, which happened, 3 years ago, almost to the day, to the American people, because as seminal as that moment was, as profoundly impactful as that moment was, it's easy to forget about when you have other things going on in your life. So the president feels the need to remind people exactly what happened.
3 years ago tomorrow, we saw with our own eyes the violent mob storm the United States Capitol. It was almost in disbelief as you first turned on the television. For the first time in our history, insurrectionists had come to stop the peaceful transfer of power in America. First time. Smashing windows, shattering doors, attacking the police. Outside, gallows were erected as the MAGA crowd chanted, "Hang Mike Pence." Inside, they hunted for Speaker Pelosi. The House was chanting as they marched through and smashed windows, "Where's Nancy?" Over 140 police officers were injured. Jill and I attended the funeral of police officers who died as a result of the events of that day.
So there again, I mean, you could go into much more vivid detail about January 6th than even what he did, but it's important to remind people. I mean, again, drawing the contrast, the Republican Party, which says that the party of law and order, was led by a man who fomented an insurrection, the exact antithesis of law and order. They say they're the pro-police party, and yet a cult that associates with them and their leader attacked 140 police officers. Imagine the outrage that Republicans would feel if it were Antifa or people associated with the George Floyd protests attacking police officers. Imagine the outrage. But 3 years later, when it comes to January 6th, a lot of Republicans simply don't care that police officers were attacked at the Capitol because it was in service of their cult leader. Absolutely deranged. In this next clip, Joe Biden addresses Donald Trump's dereliction of duty. This is huge. This is actually a topic that I have been frequently discussing elsewhere, like with Destiny and other people in debates, because this is pivotal. This impugns Donald Trump almost as much as anything.
Because of Donald Trump's lies, they died because these lies brought a mob to Washington. He promised it would be wild, and it was. He told the crowd to fight like hell, and all hell was unleashed. He promised he would right them, everything they did. He would be side by side with them. Then, as usual, he left the dirty work to others. He retreated to the White House. As America was attacked from within, Donald Trump watched on TV in a private small dining room off the Oval Office. The entire nation watched in horror. The whole world watched in disbelief. And Trump did nothing. Members of his staff, members of his family, Republican leaders who were under attack at that very moment, pled with him. Act. Call off the mob. Imagine had he gone out and said, "Stop." And still, Trump did nothing. It was among the worst derelictions of duty by a president in American history.
Perhaps the most. This is something, again, that's been a subject of frequent conversation that I've been involved with in the past several weeks. Trump had two duties, or two parallel sets of obligations. Number one, as the cult leader of MAGA, as the guy for whom these MAGA cultists have said under oath that they were fighting for, he had a moral authority, a de facto authority over that cult to tell them to stop, to tell them to back off, to tell them to leave. He chose not to avail himself of that. But he also had a set of constitutional and moral obligations as the sitting president of the United States, as the commander-in-chief of the D.C. National Guard, the highest authority, the highest responsibility, according to our Constitution and federal law, for national security belongs with the president, not Nancy Pelosi, not the mayor of Washington, D.C., not Democrats, not Republicans, the sitting president. There was no one who had more moral and constitutional authority and responsibility to stop that insurrection than Donald Trump. And with both these sets of responsibilities, he failed spectacularly. An absolute act of constitutional dereliction, I would argue. Now, in this next clip, President Biden points out that Donald Trump, he really emphasizes a thing about Donald Trump, that Donald Trump can't stand above all else.
Trump's claims about the 2020 election never could stand up in court. Trump lost 60 court cases, 60. Trump lost the Republican-controlled states. Trump lost before a Trump-appointed judge, and then judges. And Trump lost before the United States Supreme Court. All of it, he lost.
He lost. We're getting close to the very, he's about to hit Donald Trump with the word that Donald Trump can't stand to be associated with above all else. It's building to a crescendo, and we're only 8 minutes into a 30-minute speech.
Let's be clear about the 2020 election. Trump exhausted every legal avenue available to him to overturn the election, every one. But the legal path just took Trump back to the truth, that I'd won the election and he was a loser.
There it is. There it is. That's the word. Reportedly, people say that Donald Trump hates the word loser, hates to be associated with the word loss, defeat, loser, than anything else in this world. That is how you hit this man's fragile ego, this malignant narcissist. That's how you wound him above all else. And here's the thing. I guess it's an insult, but actually I would argue it's just a perfectly accurate adjective. Donald Trump has won precisely one election so far, 2016. And under his watch, as other Republicans are pointing out, those principled enough to at least recognize this, Donald Trump has presided over defeat after defeat after defeat after defeat. They lost the 2018 midterms. He lost the White House in 2020. They lost the Senate in 2021. They underperformed spectacularly in the 2022 midterms, and then they underperformed spectacularly in the 2023 off years. It's been defeat, 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 defeat. Donald Trump is accurately, precisely a loser. Now, he's still dangerous. These two things aren't mutually exclusive. He's a profoundly dangerous loser who should be taken seriously, but he's not a winner. And his danger, the threat that he poses, is not born of strength and security. It's fragility. It's weakness. He's like a wounded animal lashing out. He stands absolutely no chance against democracy under normal situations, but he has polluted the environment to his benefit. He is aided and abetted by a Republican Party, which has become an authoritarian cult of personality. And what's funny is they don't seem to realize how much Donald Trump needs them. It's a textbook abusive relationship. It's a textbook cultish relationship. Donald Trump is a loser, and that word should be the thing that the Biden campaign and Democrats, elected officials, their surrogates in the media, and you and I, that's the word that we have to associate Donald Trump with above all else. A loser, because that's exactly what he is. And that's what we need to make him in November's election. The last thing I'll say, because again, you should check the entire speech out. One of the things as a presidential history nerd and political science buff is the fact that President Biden made repeated references to President Washington. And that came up, that was at the beginning, before George Washington became president, when he was general of the Continental Army, and then also as president. And President Biden pointed out that as the commanding general of the Continental Army, and then as the president of the United States, President Washington did something relatively unheard of. He exercised that Cincinnatus principle, which for all of Washington's obvious faults and obvious sins, the guy owned slaves, the fact of the matter is that with respect to statesmanship, Washington was relatively unique even for the time in that he turned power aside. That is a principle which is supposed to embody the American presidency, that you are supposed to return power to the people. Donald Trump, infinitely more than any other president we have seen since Washington, is the exact opposite of that, right? executive power has blossomed under both Republican and Democratic leaders. There's no question about that. President Obama expanded executive power. It's not just a Republican thing. But you know what? I never feared, and I imagine most of you didn't either, that if an incumbent Republican president or Democratic president lost an election, that they would try to seize power or stay in power, even using legal means. Right? Imagine a Democratic incumbent or a Republican incumbent just trying to simply sue their way into office. They didn't do that, right? Not unless you had a damn good reason, which Donald Trump didn't even have that. And let alone taking extra legal reasons, unlawful reasons, or unlawful means. That's what Trump did. He is a unique threat to the presidential peaceful transfer of power and to American democracy. And as long as his cult supports him, he has to lose again and again and again. We can't take it for granted. We can't just defeat him once. He has to know that all doors are closed to him. He has to be relegated to defeat forever. That's basically the gist of President Biden's speech. You should definitely check it out. It was pretty good. Let me know what you think in the comments, because I guarantee you this is going to trigger MAGA. It's going to trigger the Fox Propaganda Network, and it's going to trigger Trump himself.